Much for tuning in this morning. Now, the Black Management Forum, or the BMF, says that the organization is waiting for Denel to respond to their lawyer's letter to answer questions following the decision to employ Daniel du Toit as the company's CEO. And this appointment comes months after the former CEO of Denel, Zwelakhe Ntshepe, resigned with immediate effect, citing personal reasons. The BMF says that this decision reverses the gains made by the country and that it sets back the targets in achieving top black executive professional appointments. And expecting a response by this coming Friday, the BMF says it will depend on Denel's response whether it takes the matter to the courts or not. And our guests now are BMF President Andile Nomlala, who joins us from our Sea Point studios in Cape Town, and here in Joburg we're joined by Gabriel Crouse, who is an associate of the Institute of Race Relations. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
So,
thank you very much, Sakin.
Andile, I'm going to start with you as the BMF. If you could just outline for us precisely what your consternation is with the Denel situation right now.
Thank you, Sakin. The biggest gripe we have with Denel is that even themselves, they have actually commissioned an employment equity compliance assessment report. And that report shows a dire situation within Denel of issues of transformation. They've got about 8 divisions there, and only one, you could say, is mended by a black person. The rest are untransformed and are mainly mended by white Afrikaner males. Now, what we have a gripe on is that if that is the case, at divisional level and even at executive level, how then do you come to a conclusion that on transformation matters? How do you then come to a conclusion that a white Afrikaner male would be the suitable and ideal person to run Denel? Now, the question that we are questioning this point on is not based on the fact that the white person doesn't qualify or anything else. We base our questioning of this appointment on Employment Equity Act of the country. And we are saying that we are also in very much support of Denel making a turnaround, and we are very much in support of Denel being run properly. And we believe that there are many suitable black professionals in the country that could have mended that position. So for us, it's a question of if Denel feels that the best person for the job is a white person, then they must prove to us that who else amongst the black people that could have been there. That's the question. We send them the letters through our lawyers to ask who else was there that was considered, that was not made to fit the job or didn't suit the job. Because when we talk employment equity, we are not talking that people must be put in jobs because they are just being pushed. Employment Equity Act is very clear that when you are considered for a position, you must first be qualifying, you must first be having the necessary qualifications, and we believe that there are many blacks. And one last thing, Sakina, that I want to raise is that people are asking why BMF is questioning this appointment now. Is it a racial issue? And I would say no. If you remember last year or 2 years before last, or maybe 2016, somewhere there, we questioned the appointment of NYDA board members who were completely unqualified individuals with matrics as highest qualification, some of them. We question that. We are not questioning these things because it's only whites. We are questioning anything that is against what the South African society seeks to achieve. If we don't realize transformation, and if government is a proponent of a transformed society, they can't then look and talk the other side and walk the other direction. So we're very fervent and we're very clear as BMF that if this appointment can't meet the necessary stipulations of Employment Equity Act, then we are against it, and we will test it in court, by the way, to see if for indeed they did comply with the rules of employment equity.
So you want to test this in court on what basis exactly?
The basis we are testing it with is that we believe that Denel should have moved on the direction of appointing a black person. Now, appointing a black person comes with all sorts of laws in the country when it comes to affirmative action and employment equity. And we believe that Denel didn't comply with that. So what we want to test is the fact that is this appointment legitimate or not in terms of employment equity.
Gabriel, let me come to you on that. So what do you believe should have been done? How should Denel have gone about the selection and appointment process of this particular candidate based on what the BMF is saying?
Right. Well, so Denel was put in a difficult situation as previous CEO. In your introduction, you said he left for citing personal reasons, but there were allegations going around at the time that he was involved with giving a fake bursary to the former premier of the Northwest, Supro, who's been dismissed himself. So there was a bit of a scandalous thing, and they had to recover, and I think the process that they should have gone through was a clear sort of find the best candidate kind of process. The details on that are a little bit open, and they will come forward through this motion. I'd like to point something out about the sort of investigation that Denel had done into itself after allegations had been raised by Lemusa, which is the union whose workers are represented there, that transformation wasn't being followed through with. And that investigation found in one department that there were problems, and I'd like to quote the Lemusa Secretary General on what those problems were. He said, in the report it clearly states that white males are dominating and white Indians. That department was being led by Ishmael Dokrat at the time, and I think it's curious that your guest, the head of BMF, has been specifying white Afrikaner. So there's these different kinds of whites that are coming out of this conversation: white Afrikaners, white Indians, white males, and I think those categories speak to the deeper confusion at hand here, which is thinking that a cookie-cutter approach to people's race and identity is going to do better the more closely we refine and splice apart and divide one another into smaller and smaller categories. And the fact that the large Indian presence at Denel, at executive and board level and administrative levels, is dismissed by both BMF and Lemusa as a bad thing, as somehow part of white monopoly capital or something regressive, indicates that perhaps the real issue is that they're invested in whatever malfunctioning administrative problems there have been at Denel that have been dragging it down. Don't want clear, concise, anti-corrupt administration to come in there and sweep away those who've been keeping their fingers in the till, and so are creating, in a classic South African tradition, a facade in order to defend potential progress.
Let me get Andile to respond to that.
Quickly, Sakina, let me just put it on record. We haven't dismissed any appointment of Indians. Indians are black in South Africa, so those appointments are very favorable to our agenda. But what I'm saying to you, which is very clear, is that also we are pro cleaned up Denel. We are pro and a proper governed Denel. That one is without a doubt. So I'm not going to dwell into what the gentleman that you are sitting with on the studio. But the other reality is that if you look, I had made interactions, and I'm aware, fully aware, that's why Denel will then come and explain themselves. To us, we have sent them a letter to explain themselves on the process that they followed on this. They will explain themselves on the exact people that are running those divisions. That gentleman you are sitting with at the studio there has no information. Denel's divisions, I'm telling you now, Denel's divisions are predominantly run by white males. And I don't know a word about white Indians, what that is. And BMF hasn't said that. But what we're saying is that BMF wants a Denel that is properly governed, properly run, but we feel that there is many black professionals in South Africa that could do that job. That's all that we're calling for. And we want Denel itself to be compliant with the Employment Equity Act. That act is a law in this country. So you don't wake up every morning and you decide what to do. By the way, Denel is a start. And everybody else, particularly private sector, they must know now, as a matter of fact, that whenever they're making appointments that are anti-employment equity and they are anti-affirmative action, they must make those appointments and also prepare affidavits, because BMF will not let them loose either. And we are glad that we started with Denel, because we don't want to look like we're having a witch hunt. of having only to chase people that don't want to transform. We want to chase everybody that is not compliant with the law of this country, white or black or any other person. If you don't meet the employment equity laws of this country, BMF will be on your case. That's as simple as that. And with private sector in particular, there are many companies that have their own employment equity plans that they don't meet. And in court, there's been court judgments, by the way, on these matters, Sakina. One very clear court judgment was with the correctional services. If you read that judgment, you will find within those lines that it says people must have employment equity plans and they must appoint according to those plans. And there are many people that don't do that, including Denel. Denel is one of the most untransformed state-owned companies, and we're not going to let them loose when they are making a white appointment for a CEO job. If you bring in a CEO that is white in an already untransformed environment, what then do we expect? And we're not going to keep quiet about that.
Gabriel, and you know, if you can also just speak to that transformation agenda,
yeah,
especially in this instance where you're replacing a former black CEO with a white CEO. What's your take on that?
Right. So I think that to look at the issue more broadly, it sounds like BMF's position is, firstly, we're going to ignore, specifically we're going to ignore the boots on the ground that we have, Lemusa, and their information. If they're saying white Indians, we'll just disavow that. But more broadly, it sounds like they're saying, listen, everyone should watch out. If you appoint a white CEO, then you're breaking the Employment Equity Act. We're against any white CEO at all. That sounds like a problem. And it's early in the year, so let me introduce a big word and a very simple idea. The big word is teleological paradox. It's a simple idea. It means there's some things, the harder you try to do it at a certain point, the more impossible it becomes. Spontaneity is a perfect example. The harder you try to be spontaneous, the harder it is to be spontaneous. The harder you try to be cool, you're not going to be cool if you try to be cool at school. I think that to a certain extent, affirmative action is getting to that point in South Africa, where the harder you try to push for more black, excellent people in executive positions, the harder it's going to be to actually achieve that, and the easier it's going to be for corrupt, nepotistic, well-connected, and smooth-talking political types to get in, and not for the real talent to get through. And I think that's a problem that is being raised here, but it's a general problem. It's an important problem in South Africa, and I hope we think about it clearly.
But in this particular instance, where you had a black CEO, where you have an entity that is seemingly still struggling with the transformation imperative, do you think that it was the right thing to replace a black CEO with a white CEO?
Yeah, I think that it's an open question insofar as I am not absolutely certain what the process was according to which Daniel du Toit was appointed. So without knowing the full details, I can't speak specifically to the case. But if the question is just there was a black CEO and now there's a white CEO, is it for that reason not good? I think the answer must be no. There's not enough evidence just based on that to say that something wrong has gone on here. As long as Daniel du Toit is fair, as long as he is the best person, not man, for the job, I think that his appointment is perfectly appropriate. Denel's in a crisis. They get the best person for the job. He can pull them out of the crisis. That'll be good for everyone. Their employees, many of whom are black, many of whom are Indian, many of whom are Afrikaans, many of whom are men and women, and so on and so forth. And it is a key industry in this country. It's a strategic industry. It's a curious one because a lot of the infrastructure was developed in the previous evil and wicked regime, but it's been maintained. And the more money we can make out of not buying our armed vehicles and those resources that we need in order to defend the country, and rather employ South Africans to make them ourselves, the better it is for everyone in South Africa.
Let me ask Andile, if the selection process was fair, if it was above board, as Gabriel would outline, would you then be in agreement with Daniel du Toit as the CEO of Denel?
Before I go to that, I'm quite surprised with Gabriel's sentiments about everything else. It shows how backward thinking he is. It's the typical is the typical people that we don't want to be engaging with in this country, and we're not going to be backing them. For someone to say affirmative action is going to reach itself by date when we have a country that still 76% of senior executive positions are under white hands, then you must just know that you are dealing with somebody else that is completely out of sorts and who doesn't understand the demographics and what we need to do in this country. And another thing, Sakina, that I must come into is that affirmative action and employment equity is actually trying to also bring in social cohesion in this country. When blacks become economically viable, we would have less of the other issues, that the social ills that we have. And it is important and imperative for us to have a socially cohesive country through economic equality. And lastly, Sakina, on the very same subject, is that we need to be very sensitive on the fact that people have this assumption that means transformation is mutually exclusive to excellence. BMF stands for Black Excellence. You must be highly qualified, you must be highly suitable to be there, and I can tell you there is many of those type of people in our country. Let me come to the question of Mr. du Toit that you were asking.
Very quickly.
You see, we are not questioning the legitimacy in terms of process, in terms of him being a suitable person. The issue we are having is that what does his appointment mean to employment equity, particularly at Denel? Denel is one of the, as I've said earlier, one of the most untransformed state-owned enterprises. If you even look at the companies that they do business with, mainly are predominantly untransformed companies. They have divisions that are untransformed. Now, if you want to deal with that through the employment equity laws, the employment equity is a law, the act is a law in this country, then you must then tell us that based on your own environment, Denel, how then do you come to a conclusion? They've got their own internal report that tells them that they must not anytime soon appoint white males in senior executive position. It's their report that they've commissioned. And then how do they then, outside that report, come and do exactly what their own report tells them not to do? That's the question we're asking. And
well,
if that
Andile
question can't be satisfactorily answered for BMF, then we are left with no choice but to actually seek recourse in the courts to clarify us on these matters. So that any other person, once there's a case law in place, then any other person would want to then adhere to that. And the other last preposterous accusation that your gentleman made is that we are saying we don't want white males. If the employment equity plan in that company is amenable, when companies are transformed enough with the demographics of this country, they are reflective of the demographics of this country, then we would not have issues with that. But
all right,
I can
got
tell
you there,
now,
Andile.
Almost for sure that most companies...
The report is only about one
we
subdivision.
are out of time. We are out of time, Andile.
If
the report is
on
one subdivision
believe me,
of Denel, not on Denel as
to court.
All right.
And that's what we're going to do.
It is evident that, everybody's going to make their point and totally disregard my attempts to interject. So we're going to leave it there because on Friday, of course, the BMF is expecting the response from Denel. And from there, it would seem as though they are quite intent on taking this matter to court. So I have no doubt that we will perhaps be calling Andile as well as Gabriel back to come and engage us further on this particular matter, because there are so many issues still that we need to unpack with regard to this, including the Employment Equity Act. So thanks so much to BMF President, that was Andile Nomlala, and also Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations for talking to us about Daniel du Toit, the CEO of Denel, and his appointment and the ructions that have erupted as a result of that. It's 8 o'clock.